This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPhone, PDF Pen for iPad, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. Welcome to MacVoices at WWDC and the AltConference in San Francisco. And actually, this is going to be a Mac Notables version of MacVoices, and I get to do it with Ted Landau in person. Ted, this is a rare treat.
Well, not that rare. We get together from time to time. But,
yeah, but we don't get to do these together. We seem to go to have dinner together, but we don't do these.
Yeah, well, it's fun. A chance to come into San Francisco here. We're Jillian's, I guess we should say that. And,
yeah.
And it's fun. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. So, gee, Ted, what shall we talk about?
I don't know.
There's nothing happening.
We could talk about President Obama's comments in Europe or something like that. But, probably not what people are wanting to hear.
No, I don't think so. We had a 2-hour tour de force, especially from the developer perspective yesterday, by Tim Cook and Craig Federighi and the Apple crew.
Yeah.
So you and I have talked. We talked a lot of predictions and thinking what we would see. What jumped out at you as some of the most important key points?
Well, first, in terms of what we talked about, we talked at some length about what possible hardware announcements they would make, and they made zero. And for the record, I'm not the least bit disappointed by that, which we can get to as we go on. It became clear about midway through the talk that we're not going to see any hardware announcements, and it became clear why. The other thing I say by way of introduction before we get into the specifics is that I felt that this keynote, maybe I'm overstating here a little bit, but I'll go out on a limb. This is the keynote where the people at Apple that deliver these keynotes came out from under the umbrella of the passing of Steve Jobs. That I felt I was trying to come up with a metaphor, analogy, whatever I was thinking about. It's sort of like a fighter that gets knocked down in a fight. Maybe takes an 8 count or something like that, and it gets up. Losing Steve Jobs was like that. And now you're the people in the audience, and you're wondering, what did that do to them? Is his opponent going to be able to finish him off? Is he going to be woozy? Is he going to be okay? What's going to happen? And he may be a little bit unsure himself after something like that. And you sort of see that in what Apple has done for a while. There was, especially at these keynotes, there was some hesitancy, some uncomfortableness, not quite sure what their new roles were going to be. And as it turns out, Apple, like a fighter that goes on to recover completely after something like that, Apple's doing quite well. The company's doing quite well, the stock is doing quite well, and the people on stage seem more comfortable than ever. It was as if they said, we found our new voice, this is it, this is where we're going. Like it or not, it may work, it may not, but we're happy with it, and they seem quite comfortable with it, more than I've ever seen before.
I agree. They seem to be. And I realized it was a bit of a different audience at a developers conference, but they seemed almost playful. They took a couple fun little swipes at Android and maybe even one or two at Windows, and a couple little inside jokes if you were paying attention, maybe against Google. But it didn't come across, at least not for me, as mean-spirited or anything else.
They were having fun.
Yeah, they were having a good time.
And you could tell. And the other general thing I'll say in terms of the hardware business is, I've seen some reports on the web, inevitably, and on TV, actually I saw one on TV last night that really I fell off my seat, where the person on TV said, wasn't this the most boring keynote ever? And obviously he wasn't around for Gil Amelio's keynotes.
Ouch.
But I think when they say something like that, all I can think of is one or two things. Either they're just being deliberately provocative because they know that's what gets ratings, and they're being told, say something outrageous that the other person can then say, no, you're wrong, because that's the way we operate. Or they really have no understanding of what's going on in Apple. The people will say, well, they didn't announce anything. Well, they announced a lot of things. Yes, they didn't ship anything, and they certainly didn't announce any new hardware, but that's not the same thing as not announcing anything. This is a developers conference, and the slant has always been at this conference to announce things that are more relevant to developers, and that usually primarily means software. It's always been event that was light on hardware, and this year was no different. If December rolls around and Apple hasn't released a new iPhone or a new iPad or several other things that we could talk about by the end of the year, okay, then I'd say those people have a legitimate gripe. But to complain that Apple didn't release any new hardware at this event, and that's a problem, I think is wrong. And to say that it was boring is wrong, because even if you're not a developer, there were a lot of things that are exciting and to use a trite phrase, game-changing almost about what Apple announced. And we can get into them now if you want. Sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the problem is that a lot of people don't understand when Apple comes out and says Keynote with the capital K, that you got to expect the new hardware, and that's not at all what this was about. This was a developers conference. I was at the AltConference watching with that crowd. There was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of positive whooping, and the kind of things that you would expect over what was being shown. And there was nobody came away and said, "Oh, they didn't announce anything, or they didn't announce any hardware." This was their world, and we were having a chance to look into it.
And I agree, and I would add that you don't have to be a developer to appreciate what Apple announced yesterday. And I wrote a column which I went through what I thought were the three biggest things, and as an end user, there were three things that I'd been longing for a long time. And so the first one is clearly the continuity feature. I mean, it's just amazing to think about that you're going to be able to be working, say, on an email message on your Mac and say, "Oh my God, I'm late for my appointment. I got to go someplace." You go someplace, maybe it's a doctor's appointment. You're in the waiting room, and you say, "Oh, I'm in the waiting room. I can finish working on that email." Oh, it's on my Mac. No problem. With the new operating systems, you'll be able to pick up that email on your iPhone or your iPad, whatever you have with you, and continue working on it. You'll be able to transfer a phone call from your Mac from your iPhone to your Mac. And answer it on your Mac, even if the iPhone isn't in the same room. You'll be able to set up an instant hotspot between your Mac and your iPhone. So if you don't have a Wi-Fi network on your Mac, and you can piggyback on your iPhone's LTE network, essentially a tethering, but a type of tethering that is less dependent on the carrier networks than the current type is. And on and on. There are numerous of these capabilities that Apple put under the general heading of continuity that essentially say there's going to be a seamless interplay between Macs and iOS devices. They're more and more similar in a good way. We talked about this over the years. I didn't want the Mac to become similar to iOS devices in a bad way. I didn't want them to suddenly hide the system software or say we're doing away with the Finder because there's no Finder in iOS and we're going to make them alike. Right. That sort of similarity I was afraid of, and Apple apparently, quite clearly now, they've been on the record saying that's not what they're going to do, and this conference certainly shows that. What they're doing is making the two similar in a good way, in a way so that whatever you see on one platform, you recognize something similar on the other platform. Whatever you're doing on one platform, you can do it, continue doing it via this handoff in the other platform. And I think it's really exciting. I think end users will eat it up once those down. And I think end users in the demos that were shown could appreciate how exciting all that was.
I'm with you. The continuity thing, a lot of us have been trying to do sort of a poor man's continuity where if you use Gmail, you started editing something, an email on one device, you could open it on the other and do that. But nothing anywhere near as slick as the way that it looks like they're going to try to implement it. Oh, yeah. And now you're going to be able to do it with not just one or two applications and call it syncing. You're going to be able to truly make it move between devices. And that's phenomenal.
And it shows, again, it also shows how the power of what Apple can do when they have control of both the software and the hardware. That if Android tried to do something like that, it would have to depend on the various hardware manufacturers to implement it, and it probably would not be universally implemented. It would be fragmented over several iterations of the software. Apple comes out and does it, and essentially everyone who's using an iPhone 4S forward apparently was going to be able to do this sort of thing, and so it's a whole different appeal and a much broader appeal, and I think it'll be fantastic.
Yeah. Ted, Peter Cohn was here this morning, and we talked a little bit about this, but is Apple the only company that can do this? And what I mean by that is they have the hardware infrastructure among devices. They have the software infrastructure. Are they really the only players in this space right now?
I think they're the only players that can do it as easily and get that wide range of adoption that we're talking about as fast. There's no other company that can do that. I think there are things that Google could do with the Android devices that would match some of these features over time, but the guarantee of success wouldn't be there, and the speed of success wouldn't be there. Apple's the only one that can do that. Yeah.
So I saw a couple tweets yesterday, and it was really interesting later in the day as people had time to think about it and absorb some things. The reaction to Swift as a new programming language. Some people were absolutely gung-ho on it. There were a few people who felt like this may be a little bit arrogant on Apple's part to create a new language. I'm curious to see if you have a take on that.
Well, since I'm not a developer really anymore, not that I ever really was one except for my own homemade programs I did years ago, I can't say how much of an improvement Swift will be. Apple certainly touted the improvements. I could understand why they were saying it would be better. And if that lives up to those touts, then I think it really will be better. And I think people will be happy to use it. Eliminating a lot of the error codes that could otherwise come up, I think, is big right off the bat. And the fact that it integrates with C, so you don't have to commit to it, I think is good too. I don't get the arrogance. I don't feel it's arrogant. They've devoted a lot of time and energy into this. They already have an 800-page book that you can get for free in iBooks. I mean, if you don't want to use it, don't use it. They're not saying now you have to use it this way, but they're saying it can be used this way. And I don't know what ultimate effect it will have, but the early word that I've heard from some developers that I've seen talking about it on the web is positive mostly.
Yeah, well, the people we've talked to here seem to be very much, especially with the playground part built in as well, that you have this visual feedback thing. You don't have to necessarily load an emulator. It's just all right there, so you can have kind of instant gratification to your coding. And I mean, it almost feels like WYSIWYG coding in a way.
Well, it isn't to some extent. Yeah. And the other thing, while we were talking, the other thing that I think that has changed about Apple, aside from the more comfortableness that we've talked about before, is they finally seem to be getting ready to open up the iOS in significant ways. I'm going to talk about two of them. That Apple was routinely criticized by some segments of the user base for being this closed shop. You couldn't post an app on iOS unless it got approved from the App Store. The whole software was hidden. It was hard to make any sort of system modifications. And in every possible way that just about you can imagine, iOS was closed up. And people sometimes criticized it for that. Sometimes people lauded it for that because they thought it was good for security purposes. So it's a double-edged sword. But in any case, there was just this feeling that even given the security levels that Apple wants, it doesn't have to be quite as tightly closed as it has been. And couldn't Apple at least do this, at least do that would be the sort of thing again. Well, I think Apple has responded to a lot of those criticisms, certainly to the ones that I've made, with some of the new features. And two that I'll mention in particular. One is the iCloud Drive, which in some sense, I mean, isn't totally new. I mean, it's almost a harking back to when they had iDisk, but now it's sort of been enhanced with the documents in the cloud aspect of it. But what it does for the first time, it is significant in my view, for the first time, it allows you to put documents in a location on your Mac where they can be accessed by any iOS app. I mean, the documents in the cloud, the way it works now, for instance, is if you save a document to Pages on your Mac, the only app that can see that document is Pages on iOS. And so if there was another app that could open, or even a worse example, is you modify a PDF file on your Mac in Preview. You can't see that at all on an iOS device because there is no Preview app in iOS. Even though there are many iOS apps that can open and work with PDF files, it's not a file restriction. It's Apple. It's the way documents in the cloud was structured by Apple to make sure everything was sandboxed, and you didn't want something that one app created to be accessible by another app. Right. With iDrive now, with iCloud Drive, they're making it so that there will be an iCloud sheet that you can bring up that will give you access to all those documents that you've created, and it will be accessible by virtually any app. And so this is huge. I mean, it's the first time that Apple has said, okay, we're going to let documents have some freedom of access across apps as opposed to just within apps, and have it be officially supported by Apple. There are all sorts of ways that's going to make life easier for people who do cross-platform work between Macs and iOS devices.
Do you think this was a genuine philosophical change, Ted, or do you think they finally got comfortable with the back-end mechanics of it so that you are still protected as an iOS user, but you can enjoy the benefits of sharing information between applications?
I certainly don't know. I have no inside information about what goes on at Apple in that regard, but my guess would be that it's a combination of two things. One is they feel that they have the security sufficiently locked down that they can now find ways that they can open it up a little bit without sacrificing the level of security that they want. So it's first you have to build the house, and then you can figure out ways to modify it to answer some of the complaints that the new owners are going to have about, well, the ventilation isn't good here. Okay, well, we can fix that. Right. The basic house is still going to be the same. And I think that's what's happened. And I also think, honestly, that they're doing things that I don't think Steve Jobs would necessarily approve of, because he was probably the biggest driving force behind keeping things closed. I mean, remember, he didn't even want an app store to begin with. Right. They had to drag him kicking and screaming to approve that there would be an app store, because he didn't like the idea that third parties would be able to modify the iPhone interface at all. So with a mentality like that, this level of openness might have been something that Steve would have rejected. I don't know for sure, nobody does, but I think it's certainly easier to implement these type of changes without Steve around. So, and so I think that's what's going on. And another aspect, big aspect of it, is the extensibility features that they talked about near the end, which is that for the first time, Apple, and then again, this gets directly to the sandboxing thing, because here's Apple saying, we're going to put a hole in the sandbox a little bit and let one app get into a trap door. We're going to control how it works, but we're going to let some apps talk to other apps in a way that we never have before. And what it means is that third-party apps are going to be able to work with other third-party apps in ways. For instance, some of the examples they gave was that a photo filter program like Waterlog, instead of having to launch it separately from Photos, it'll now be able to work within Photos. And so you'll launch Photos, and you'll want to say, I want to apply that Waterlog watercolor filter to this photo, and be able to access it directly without leaving Photos. I'm hoping that Apple didn't specifically say that this will be able to lead to things like Text Expander being able to work across all apps without the hassles and hoops they have to go through now, or that you'll be able to access 1Password's passwords in apps like Safari and other apps where they check for passwords. These sort of things, which have been impossible to do before, are now going to be possible. And of course, in the same vein, we talked about opening up the fingerprint ID, so that now third-party apps can use fingerprint ID. It's not just restricted to the apps from Apple, and that will allow for new possibilities as well. So this is a major opening of the operating system, and I think probably just the beginning. I think if it works out well, that Apple will provide further opportunities for this sort of thing. And so that's why I think these things are big. They aren't things that the end user can take home today and say, wow, this is, if I had this tomorrow, it would change everything. But it's like Apple has laid the groundwork for some really dramatic changes to the operating system and how their devices work.
And maybe I'm still an Apple apologist, but it's always been my contention. There's certain things we want to be able to do, and Apple had said no. They've never exactly said no, we're not ready yet, but no, and here are the reasons we won't let you do it, and they've made sense. The sandboxing thing, protecting you, making sure things can't get away. Now, for whatever reason it took this long, but they figured out a way to kind of let you in. And now we have that. And so I'm very happy with that. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to see this kind of evolution, but only when it's fully baked, not when it's half baked or just they throw it out there and say, here, do with it what you want. I'm really not looking forward to the day that happens.
Well, that doesn't look half baked to me.
No, not this. No. There's a lot of fully baked stuff to it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, you and I have never entirely agreed on this subject, and going back many years, I have seen the advantages to Apple's approach, and it has certainly not prevented me from enjoying using my iPad, my iPhone, which I probably spend more time on now than my Mac. So I certainly can't complain that they're horrible devices or anything close to it. They're wonderful. But it's always, I've always been had the feeling that when I buy this device, I'm not leasing it from Apple. I'm not renting it from Apple. It's my device. And if I want to do something that Apple thinks is harmful, that's my prerogative. I can buy a bottle of alcohol, buy a bottle of wine, and I can have one drink a week, or I can drink the entire bottle at once, and that wouldn't be good for me. But I don't expect the people who sell me the bottle of alcohol to somehow prevent me from drinking the bottle at once if that's what I want to do. That's up to me, and that's always been my philosophy. So I've always harbored negative feelings about how Apple has controlled it, and I've just sort of put up with it because I thought, all other things being equal, I'd rather be sticking with Apple than the alternative.
How do you feel about the health announcements and the HomeKit announcements? Are these truly the harbingers of things to come?
Well, I have to hedge on that because, on the one hand, well, first of all, Apple didn't spend a lot of time on it, especially the home automation. I mean, if you look down at your shoelaces for a couple of seconds, you probably missed the whole home automation announcement. It was there and then it was gone. And it's not clear to me exactly what they're going to do. Oh, yeah, you can say time to go to bed and things will happen. That's about the gist of it. Exactly how it will happen and what it will work with and how well it will work and if you'll be happy with it or not, who the hell knows? So it's much too early to give a definitive answer to those sort of questions. And almost the same thing with health. They went into a little more detail with health, with the Mayo Clinic app and so on. And I think, certainly in the case of health, they're going to be linked to some hardware devices. You can expect some FitLink-like device, if not a modified version of FitLink itself, that will be a Fitbit. I mean, not FitLink. Fitbit that will work with it. And I think both of them are potential huge things. I mean, if Apple can really succeed in the arena of health-related apps and using your iOS devices for health monitoring, and even more so if they can do it for home automation and really make it so that they become the dominant player, and that's a pretty big if. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but then I think those are huge things for Apple. I mean, controlling home automation, it's hard to imagine anything that would be bigger than that right now. I think that's one of the next big frontiers for where computers are going to go. The Internet of Things, where everything in your house is controlled by the Internet. And if Apple is the master device doing the controlling, that's spectacular for Apple. So yeah, I think I said in my article, these things are so huge that it was just evidence of the depth of Apple's announcements. That most other companies would have been content to have those things be their entire keynote. Instead, like I said, Apple had to bury it almost and give it a few seconds. Yeah. That's how much stuff Apple was announcing, which again gets me back to the idea to say that Apple didn't announce anything is just absurd.
Yeah, I remember the slide where they said we've been working with these companies, and I think I got about halfway through the second row of maybe 4 or 5 rows, and the slide was gone. It's like, who else was in there?
Yeah, you got to freeze frame it on the replay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, but just the fact that it also sounds like they're not, and we don't know anything here, folks, but it feels like they're not just going to say it has to be invented here. They are reaching out and working with some of the people that are out there and doing a lot of the hardware aspects of the Internet of Things, and Apple's going to try to do at least part of the software. And I love that approach because I don't I don't really know that Apple needs to manufacture my garage door opener or my front door lock, as long as they can interface with it successfully.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Apple wants to be in the business of making door locks.
Yeah,
I think that's exactly what they're going to do, and they'll be working together with a lot of companies to come up with something that works. Yeah. And it will, just like today, you see all sorts of things that say, works with iOS devices, or get the iOS app. Apple has penetrated the market successfully enough that no matter what someone wants to do with mobile devices, they're going to make sure it works with iOS devices. And that's one of the advantages of being big and successful. And I think they'll have a pretty easy time convincing companies to go along with that as well.
One thing, and I have to paraphrase Tim Cook because I don't exactly remember the wording, but he basically said that Apple has always been a forward-thinking company. And I feel like...
It says it at the end of every one of their public relations.
Well, yeah, but this time it felt like there was a lot of backing to it. It resonated with me a little more this time, just because of the announcements that were being made and the approach that they were taking. I think somewhere in there it resonated with me because of Yosemite, that we weren't seeing this huge interface change that I think a lot of the developers I've talked to were maybe a little afraid of. It's more a refinement. It's more not radical changes, but some nice changes, and maybe with more to come once we actually get to see it. And that felt like a more mature, measured company than even maybe last year's iOS update when Johnny Ive came out and they changed so many of the things. And I think you and I do agree on it's not always for the better.
Last year, I feel when I think about it now, I wasn't thinking this way last year particularly, but as huge as iOS 7 changes were last year, as I reflect on them now, they were mainly interface changes. They were changing the look and feel, how things worked. It didn't necessarily change, not how things worked, I guess, maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but how things appeared. The home screen didn't necessarily work a lot differently. It just looked a lot different.
Right.
And it was significant. I don't mean to trivialize it. There were some changes. Well, but this year, now they got that out of the way, and they've done some of the same changes with Yosemite now on the Mac. They're more invested in how differently they can get things to work rather than how they look. They got the interface out of the way last year, and now it's on to the features. And I think it's working out well. Yeah. They're on their own time schedule, and they seem to be sticking to it. And they're not, and happily, they don't seem too concerned about the people who say if they don't come out with an iWatch next week, the company is doomed.
Yeah, I guess we're as guilty as anybody because we're anxious for whatever the next thing is, even if it's not the next big thing. We're still looking at the next thing, and
well, no, but is there anybody in the world who thinks that Apple isn't going to come out with an iPhone 6 and a new iPad before the year is over? The fact that they didn't announce them yesterday, so what? They're going to be announced before the summer's over.
Well, and as we started out by saying, this was a developers conference. They talked about things that were important to this audience. When we go to have another one of the, when they go to have an iPad event, it'll be important to the iPad audience, the iPad using audience, with some overlap in developers. And we saw a little bit of overlap yesterday for consumers, but consumers were not the focus yesterday.
Yeah. So. Well, it remains to be seen. The big questions then become, the new operating systems are going to work on current hardware. And so then, of course, the inevitable question then is, well, if everything we're seeing today is going to work on my iPhone 5S and my iMac that I have now, then when they come out with new hardware, what are they going to do? What's the new hardware going to do that I can't do with my current device? And those are the big unanswered questions. And that's where the excitement is. I'm hopeful that we'll see some pretty exciting things.
We touched on iCloud Drive a little bit. Should we have concerns because of the past, unfortunately, instability with iCloud? Or do you think maybe by integrating it so tightly into iOS, Apple has a high level of confidence at this point of it working and working as advertised?
Are you talking about security or just failure rates?
I'm just talking failure rates.
I see. It's been my experience that it's working better. I think some initial kinks, apparently Apple got it worked out at their end. I have found it to be about as reliable now as, say, Dropbox. And so I'm not too worried about that. I think when iCloud first came out, there was enough oddities that people were saying, Apple can't get this cloud stuff right. Mobile Me doesn't work, and iDisk doesn't work, and whatever doesn't work, and this is just going to be another thing that doesn't work. But I don't think that's the case. I think iCloud is here for the long haul, and I think they've been building it up. They've put a lot of resources into it, and they are committed to making this the thing that's going to be the competitor for similar cloud services that other companies have. And I think, of course, they have the advantage of having it be built in. I don't anticipate, from my looking at it, that iCloud it means I'm going to dump Dropbox. There's still, I imagine, things that Dropbox can do that iCloud Drive isn't going to be able to do. iCloud Drive still looks focused on document sharing more than anything else. But I'm pretty confident that's going to work.
I looked at the iCloud Drive pricing, and I was really impressed by that. It's like, okay, now we know what they're doing with all those data centers, because they're going to try to make this a very affordable kind of thing for a lot of people to implement and have it become a major part of their lives. And I really like that idea.
Well, I think that's a driving force behind a lot of this. From a business point of view, you can say, well, what's the business profit-seeking advantage that Apple is looking at here? They're looking at people who are increasingly invested in the Apple ecosystem. If they look and they say, wow, I can use handoff to pass my pass my documents that I'm working on from my iOS device to my Mac. I can't do that from my iOS device to my PC. Maybe I should get a Mac to replace my aging PC so I can take advantage of that. And look at iCloud, all those things that I can do with iCloud that, in fact, as I recall, handoff will only work with iCloud. So if I'm using Dropbox, I'm not going to be able to do that handoff stuff. And so I'm going to make sure, even if I keep Dropbox, that I have iCloud going as well, and I'll pay for some storage. And so it gets everybody invested in the Apple ecosystem from top to bottom. And inevitably, Apple's going to make more money that way. So I think that's, and they're in the business of making money. They're not a charity. So they may have customer satisfaction in mind, but ultimately only because customer satisfaction leads to them making more money.
I've said this a couple times today, that the first thing that went through my mind as they were showing some of this stuff is, why would you go anywhere else unless you were just really, really heavily invested? Why, as a user, would I not want to take my iPad and maybe add a Mac to it, or take my iPhone and add an iPad to it? It just seems like the most natural thing in the world. And that's, yes, I'm an Apple user, so that's my disclaimer, but still.
Yeah, it's always appealed to me. I like the idea, for instance, that when a new iPhone comes out, basically I have to choose between an iPhone 5S and an iPhone 5C, and that's it. And whichever one I choose, I know I'm going to be running the latest version of the operating system. I like that simplicity, as opposed to the Android world, where you have 30 different possible Android devices from 6 different manufacturers, mostly Samsung these days, but still other companies, and that you have a situation where older devices are running various different versions of the operating system, like the slide that Tim Cook showed, where it said something like 18% of all Android users are using the latest version of the operating system, as opposed to like 89% for Apple. And so those things make a difference to me, and the integration that Apple provides between the software and the hardware make a difference to me. And so that's, those are some of the big reasons I've stuck with Apple all these years and never thought about going anyplace else.
And you mentioned that slide, and I go back to some of the swipes at Android. Some, were the usual kind of good-natured Apple thing, and I say good-natured. Maybe not everybody agrees with that. But then there was also certain presentation of facts that, this is the percentage of people that are running the current version of Android. I'm sorry, that's not. I don't see that as an insult. I see that as a fact. They did a little editorializing on Android as a place for malware, which, everything I've read says, yeah, that's pretty much true. It's there.
That's what I've read as well, and certainly our experience. I mean, I don't recall ever having a malware attack on my iPhone. So if you've had one malware attack on your Android device, that's one more than I've had on my iPhone.
good point. Yeah, it's like UFO sightings. Just that one is enough to say that there's a problem. What else we've had a lot of stuff, Ted. What else have we missed that you felt were really important or jumped out at you as, wow?
The business with iMessages I thought was really cool. That you're going to be able to, I know my wife will love it because she doesn't like typing on the iPhone. It's too small for her as far as she's concerned, the little keyboard. Right. And so she's been using dictation when she wants to send text messages, which works pretty well. She just talks into it and converts it to text amazingly accurately. I think now she'll be happy that she doesn't even have to worry about whether the text is correct and making corrections to it if it's not. You just talk into the device and the audio file itself gets transferred to the receiving person. I think that's going to be huge. You can even do video with automatic deletion rates, and I think that's going to be quite cool. I'm excited about that. Some of the new photo features, I think, including the ability to store all your photos, including, it gets back to another continuity feature, I guess. But if you crop a photo on one app, on one platform now, that crop photo becomes instantly available on the other platform. That's new, and that would be great. My wife has had problems with that, where she works 15 minutes on a photo on her Mac, and then says, "How do I get this thing on my iPhone?" Well, you're not going to have to worry about that anymore. It'll just be there.
They did that just for you, Ted. That's right. Yeah. I especially love the idea that I will be able to address messages and different things right from my lock screen. It's a little thing, but it's really nice not to, I've got to dig down, open this app, and go there. And it's another example of sharing things back and forth and why it'll make so much sense.
Yeah, actually I was thinking about that the other day with my iPhone in terms of a new feature that I would like Apple to implement someday, and they moved in that direction with this. And that is, let's say I'm playing a game, which I still do, like Threes, for instance. And I'm like today, I'm playing it and I'm taking the BART in, and these are minor complaints, but when you have a device as wonderful as the iPhone, you can start getting picky about me. And I'm sitting on the platform waiting for the BART train to come, and then the train pulls up, and I turn my iPhone off, put it in my pocket temporarily while I navigate getting onto the train, and then I sit down, take it out again, and I'm on the lock screen and I have it set up where I have to enter the password, either type it in or do a fingerprint thing. And so I'm swiping and fingerprinting or typing. And wouldn't it be nice if I could say to the operating system, "It's okay, leave Threes on the lock screen," so that for the next hour or so, that's what I want to see as soon as I turn my iPhone on. Instead of anything else, so that I can just continue to play this game until I'm done with it without having to worry that every time I turn it off I'm going to have to go back to the lock screen again. And I think it's sort of what they do with the camera right now, that you can just open up the camera from the lock screen.
Yes.
And just a swipe and it's there. If there was another thing on the left-hand side of the iPhone instead of the right-hand side where the camera is. Anyway, so it would be nice if you could swipe up from the left-hand corner and have some app of your choice suddenly appear, something like that.
Right.
Anyway, but I'm patient at this point. Apple has delivered on so many things with yesterday's announcements that I'm not going to quibble about what they didn't deliver.
Well, I feel like they've given us a lot of stuff to talk about as we learn more about it. I already saw Macworld had an article of 20 things that you didn't know about the announcements. And, those articles are always, they're little things, but they're important things if they're important to you. So,
yeah. Well, Apple presentations, and as someone who's a professor and spent a lot of years lecturing on things, it was a hard lesson to learn for me, where if I wanted to talk about a topic, your initial tendency is, here are the 30 things that I think are important for the students to know. I'm going to talk about each of those 30 things. And at some point you realize the students are going to forget 29 of them because you can't, in an hour and a half, 2-hour lecture, whatever, you can't cover 30 things in sufficient depth that it makes sense. Right. You have to triage. You have to say, here are the 10 things that I think are most important, and that's going to be the focus of my lecture. And those other 20 things, they're going to have to learn some other way. Because I can't, and it took me a while to learn that, and I'm still learning that. I think even some of the Macworld sessions that I've given over the years, I think I've packed in more information than was wise for me to do. And Apple has learned that well. They say, here's what we're going to emphasize, and here's what we're going to show. And of course, it inevitably means that there's lots of stuff of interest that they didn't show, and that's what that Macworld article is getting at. And it'll be months. It'll be at least until weeks after the operating system gets released before we really have a full understanding of all the things that Apple announced yesterday.
Yeah. What did it take to get an A in your class?
Hard work.
Hard work. Well, Apple has done that, so I gather you would give them an A.
Yeah, certainly based on what I saw yesterday.
Ted, it's always fun. We're going to have a lot more to talk about as we go forward, but thanks for coming over and being here.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
It's fun to do it in person.
Yeah, I got a chance to actually look at you while we're doing it. Not on a TV screen.
And not over dinner.
And realize just exactly how handsome you really are.
Oh, brother. Oh, geez. Okay. All those comments I've made for you you're getting back at me. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. He's Ted Landau. This is Mac Notables on Mac Voices. We are at Jillian's, at AltConference, and WWDC. We will see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.